I randomly picked 5 decks from the comment section and played one match with each. In the end, we will decide which is the best or at least the most fun. Starting with Slime Against Humanity, a deck around the namesake card, where you can run any number of copies you like. Mill cards like Otherworldly Gaze, Phalange Archaeologist, and Rubblebelt Maverick will help us make our slimes bigger, and others like Pieces of the Puzzle and Deep Analysis will provide the much needed card advantage this deck needs. Let's put it to the test now. This hand is good, but I need to point out that casting a turn 1 Otherworldly Gaze is a mistake. Instead, I will wait until turn 2 to use Rites of Spring to trade it for land. Otherwise, I will put myself 2 cards down instead of just 1. Plus, I will also secure my land drops for the rest of the game. My opponent, meanwhile, is playing what I think is Grixis control with a pseudo-artifact team. While not impressive, I played a 2/2 slime token on turn 3. But trust me,
he'll grow.
Then my opponent played an Augur of Bolas and passed the turn. So I just untapped and played a Maverick that milled a second slime so that a third one could enter the battlefield as a 4/4. Still, my opponent then untapped and played a Murmuring Mystic, which can be bad news. As I had a couple of options here, I decided to use the Gaze in my graveyard to smooth my next draws, and as I sent everything to the bottom, I also created a 5/5 ooze, and my army started to be somewhat threatening. Still, my opponent created an army of their own thanks to the Mystic. After casting a Deduce and countering my Deep Analysis, I decided to play Pieces of the Puzzle to refill my hand. I found 2 more slime copies and a second Deep Analysis hit the graveyard. Ultimately, it was a good turn overall, and I even managed to attack for some damage. The opponent then untaps, cycles a Lorien Reveal, and passes. To this, I first attacked again, and post-combat I played 2 back-to-back slimes. Unlike Serpentine Curve tokens, these have trample, so opponents can afford to chump blocks. In the end, I lost 1 slime, but I attacked with my army once more, and after losing a second slime, my opponent was left at 3 lives, and 2 more slimes joined the party. After drawing some cards, the opponent realized they couldn't win, so we moved to game number 2. This deck needed some sideboard adjustment, but I will play it as it is in honor of transparency. I will rather not side anything, or at least not yet. I kept a similar hand for game number 2, but it's slightly more flooded. I traded 4 cards for 3 lands on turn 2 and passed it back. Meanwhile, my opponent started to ramp up thanks to Wildfire. Anyway, I put everything in the graveyard, and on my upkeep, I cast the second Gaze before drawing, and I cast the third one at the end of my opponent's turn. They then played a couple of artifacts, and I found 3 slimes on top of my library, so I decided to put only 1 back on top. I then played the first slime, but as expected, it got countered. The opponent untapped, played a Serpent and an Augur of Bolas and passed, and this is where I screwed up. You see, instead of playing back-to-back slimes to threaten some pressure, I decided to go for the value plan and drew 4 more cards. However, I lost sight of the bigger picture, and a Gearseeker Serpent started to chip away at my life total quickly. So, even after I untapped and played a blocker, they managed to counter a slime, and while the other resolved, the Serpent managed to get through by being unblockable. In a couple of turns, I found myself losing game number 2, so let's see how we do on the final one. This hand is okay. I decided to bring some Moment's Peace in case my opponent decided to go with the beatdown plan once more. As I explained in game number 1, I dislike playing no value cards like Otherworldly Gaze, so I will just discard it for some lands with the Rites of Spring at the right time. As we set up, I also decided to lead with the Archaeologist to get some board presence and a much needed card advantage, and after my opponent passed, I decided to discard 3 of my cards for 3 lands and use the Gaze at the end of my opponent's turn. They cast the Thoughtcast, and I milled 2 more cards. I then played a second Archaeologist, returning a slime and immediately cast it. Surprisingly, it resolved, but it didn't last long. Then they untap and draw 3 more cards, thanks to Lorien's Reveal. So it's my chance to put 11 power into the board and threaten a big hit next turn. Then they played a land, passed back, and I attacked. Somehow, they managed to deal with 1 of them and counter a third one. Still, the 4th copy appeared and it's ready for revenge. The opponent then untapped and a Candy Trail found a Tolarian Terror. Still, my slime tokens are bigger, and I decided to grow one further by exiling a Maverick from the graveyard and attacking. The bigger slime got killed, and the Pieces of the Puzzle got countered. So yeah, it's not the best of spots. The opponent then attacked. I chump blocked, and they dealt with the last slime, so I used my Gaze to fix my draws and found another slime that I kept on top. So, after untapping, I played it, and it managed to stick around as a 9/9. They then played a Serpent, passed the turn, and the gaze found a deep analysis, which I will keep on top to draw 4 much needed cards. So without hesitation, I just did that and refilled my hand, but decided it was useless to trade my 9/9 for a 5/5 creature, so I just passed. A Murmuring Mystic joined the party, but the opponent seemed to be low on cards in hand, so after untapping once more, I played a 10/10 and an 11/11 slime on the board and aimed to attack for little next turn. The opponent passes, and after finding some cards with the pieces of the puzzle and growing 2 of my slimes, I attack, hoping they have nothing in hand. And they had a lightning bolt, and the trample damage won me the game in the end. Next, I've got a mix of Madness, Mono Red, and Metalcraft in a mid-range Rakdos deck that I like a bit more than the traditional Rakdos Madness deck everyone plays. Getting paired against familiars is no joke, especially since this was the deck that won the latest Pauper Decks series. Nevertheless, I have a good chance of beating them, mainly if I stick a Crypt Rats into play and clean the board. This plan is critical now, as they managed to resolve a Sunscape familiar, so I can only hope they don't bounce my rat. Unsurprisingly, they did not, but decided to play a Mystic instead, so I will just play a Vampire to deal 1 damage, and the plan is to cycle the Troll for the 5th land. They then attack for 1, played a second Pharaoh, and forgot about the Crypt Rats about to nuke the board. I attacked with the Epicure and waited until the end of their turn to proceed with my plan, but to my surprise, everything went as expected. Now, I can play the Goblin Tomb Rider to deal some damage, and keep up the Blood Fountain activation to return 2 of my creatures to my hand. A 3rd Pharaoh and a 2nd Familiar joined the board on their end, and I returned the Ertas and a Troll to my hand. Plans changed as I drew a Fiery Temper, and I cycled it to kill the Familiar. Or at least that was the plan, as they happened to have a counter to prevent it. Still, I used Cast Down to remove the pesky creature, and cycled my Troll once more to get a land and play a Blood Fountain. They just passed the turn and back on mine. I played a Vampire to drain them for 4. Now, a Modern Age on their end looted away a land, and they found a Dawnbringer Cleric to create some board presence. However, I found a Kitchen Imp and discarded it with a Blood token to cast it for its Madness cost, removed both their blockers, and won the game number 1. In game number 2, I decided to side a couple of Pyroblasts and called it a day. I mulled my first hand and kept a decent second one, praying they don't have Dust to exile both my lands. The Familiars joined the party, and I did not hesitate to kill it on sight, as otherwise it could be very problematic in the near future. They used a Preordain and passed the turn, so back on mine, I tried to use a Deadly Dispute to draw a card, but it met a counter, so all I could do now was to exile their graveyard and attack for 1. While they managed to draw 2 more cards, thanks to Muldrifter, they haven't added anything relevant to the board yet, so it's my chance to deal some damage with both of my creatures. Now it's just a matter of drawing a land, so I can play my 5 drops and start draining them. They tap once more while drawing 2 cards, and on my upkeep, they decided to get rid of my monkey. The good news is that I found the 5th land and decided to play the big vampires to drain them for 4 and put them to 10. They then played a deep analysis, and a God Pharaoh's Faithful is now aiming to stabilize their life total. This can be problematic, but at least now I'm in a good position to keep pressuring the board with the cards I have and put them down to 4 lives at the end of my turn. They dealt 3 more damage themselves after casting a deep analysis from the graveyard and found a Sunscape Familiar, a couple of snaps, and all of a sudden, I don't have a board anymore. The upside is that at least each of my creatures deals damage to them when they enter the battlefield, and since they can't block the Sovereign, I decided to play that one first, putting them down to 3 lives. They then played a land and used a Desperate Hydroblast to gain 1 life by targeting their Familiar. However, this was not enough to keep them alive, and they ended up losing the match. Soul Sisters is a deck I've seen in the past but never got to play with. Cards like Soul Warden and Soul Attendant are the deck's engines, and payoffs like Blood Researcher, Celestial Unicorn, and Marauding Blight Priest are the deck's win conditions. It seems slow, but who knows, so I will test it out. I kept this hand not noticing I was missing a green source, so it's a bit of a gamble. I want to point out that this deck naturally does not run any forest, and only has 2 lands that add green mana. This needs to be fixed, despite the only green card being the Blood Researcher. Of course, Deadly Disputes somewhat help, but relying solely on treasures is not ideal. Anyways, the opponent seems to be playing the Mere Fairies. It's a tough deck to beat, but it seems to have a slow start. I dealt some cheap damage with the Soul Warden, and post-combat played a Marauding Blight Priest, but it got countered. Luckily we got Recommission on the deck, but I would suggest swapping it for Unearth for mana efficiency. Another option for the deck is Lunarch Veteran, as it not only provides another life gain effect to the deck, but also can be cast from the graveyard once it dies. One thing to note is that Soul Warden's ability triggers on each other creature entering the battlefield, regardless of who controls it. I tried attacking once more with my Soul Warden and did some cheap damage before returning the Blight Priest to the battlefield. In response, they tried to kill my Warden, and I used the Deadly Dispute to get the much needed green mana. Still, the opponent had another removal ready for my creature, so I was forced to use Dispute again. After taking some minimal damage, I added a Soul Warden to the board, along with a Blood Researcher, and brought back the Blight Priest to the battlefield thanks to Recommission. All of a sudden, I was able to put many creatures onto the board, and despite the opponent getting the Monarch, they conceded after I cast the second Researcher. Post sideboard, Arms of Hadar should help, and I am hesitant to play Duress, so we will try it out like this. I had to mulligan to 5, but I kept a decent hand in the end. Still, a couple of Soul Sisters are going to do little against a 1/3 body like Augur of Bolas. On top of that, they managed to play a Ninja of the Deep Hours and gradually started to gain advantage with each hit they made. Long story short, I got mana screwed for a while they kept drawing 2 cards every turn, so we moved to game number 3. This hand is better than the previous one, and we have all of our colors at our disposal, so we keep. After playing a Suturing Priest, the plan is to slam a Blood Researcher on the board, praying they don't have a counter. That said, they removed my creature and also slammed a Ninja by returning their fairy. So, all I could do was play the Researcher and pass. The opponent then saw the opportunity and played a Thorn, and while I killed it and stole the Monarch, they stole it back with a Ninja attack and played a fairy as a backup. I played my Priest and attacked. However, they had removal ready, so I had to use Deadly Dispute to get some cards. Or at least that was the plan. They then proceeded to add more bodies to the board, making my attacks impossible. So all I could do was play some of my artifacts, a second creature, and pass. On their turn, the opponent used a Ponder, and an Augur of Bolas got rid of my Priest. I then made a cute play by baiting a counter with the Bargain to clean the smaller creatures and force a trade. However, after they cast a Mystic, I knew this game was over, so I conceded. Initially, I was not planning to touch any deck submitted, but if I were to play it again, this is the version I would use. Scam is a term used in Modern, but it can also be applied to Pauper. Evoke cards like Ingot Chewer and Inner Flame Acolyte are the deck's payoffs, and Feign Death, Undying Malice, and Not Dead, after all, are the enablers. This deck seems very fun to play, especially in Glitters meta. I start with a Goblin Blast Runner on turn 1, as now I can sacrifice my fetch land to give it the boost it needs. The opponent seems to be on an affinity version, so they will be shocked by my main deck, Ingot Chewers. In the meantime, I decide to attack for 1 this turn and play another creature before passing. While my opponent played 2 big creatures on their turn, I happen to find the Chewer, so I will cast it for its evoke cost, and with its ability on the stack, I can use Feign Death to bring it back to the battlefield as a 4/4, but more importantly, I got rid of 2 artifacts from my opponent's side. Also, the Goblin got Menace, so I managed to deal 3 more damage this turn. On their turn, they played a Wellspring, a land, and passed, so back on mine, I used my Faithless Looting to see if I could get some better cards, and also used the Village Rites to drain them with the Scorpion ability, and gave Menace to my Goblin once more. A Galvanic Blast got rid of the poor Chewer, and they hit me for 5. I attacked, and they played a removal, so I used my Conviction in response to draw some cards. I then played a Swamp, and a Bone Picker joined the board. They attacked, and at the end of their turn, I used the Lightning Bolt to put them to 5. I then drew an Acolyte and used the Scam combo to pump my creature. However, they had a board wipe ready, so I just played the Serrated Scorpion and passed. They played a Wellspring for their turn, and back on mine, I attacked with the Scorpion only, and they block. I waited until they cracked the Candy Trail to use Lightning Bolt, and they happened to scoop the match entirely. We then got paired against a second affinity deck, and as you can see, the Ingot Chewer main deck will cause havoc despite my opponent having access to a very strong start. Unlike the last match where I killed their creatures, I will focus on destroying my opponent's Manio in this one, as shown with the Scam combo. They kept adding pressure with the Brutes, but a second Chewer kept dealing with the board. But more importantly, it enabled my Bone Picker to be cast for only 1 mana. After attacking with my Elemental, they decided it was enough and scooped the match like my previous opponent. Last but not least, we got Esper Glitters. Does Deadly Dispute and Tiding Blade are worth the splash? Well, let's find out. I keep a hand with your standard Glitters opening, and my opponent had some questionable plays at the very beginning. Still, this made me play differently, as I know they have those kinds of counters on their deck now. After adding some presence on the board, They flipped a Delver, revealing a counterspell, and they also decided to waste their spell Pierce on the drum. They also returned the Glint Hawk to my hand, and I expect them to counter it on the way back. This is great as I now have a decent bait for their counter to resolve Glitters later. With few cards on hand, all I had to do was play a Tithing Blade to make them concede and go to game number 2. Post sideboard, all I could bring was the 3 Blacksmith skills, and I shipped the deck back. This hand is better in color but slower than my previous one. Of course, they also had the turn 1 Delver ready, but at least it hasn't flipped yet. I played in a way to bait their counters, and I tried to resolve the Tithing Blade and get rid of the problem for now. With the coast clear, I also played a Skirga and passed. They passed the turn and I attacked with my Skirga and played a land. While Hoodwing on my land is a questionable play, it puts me behind on my plan of flipping the blade. A few turns passed, and I flipped the blade to deal cheap damage to them. That said, they played 2 back-to-back terrors and the clock started to run against me. I drew more cards, and one of my card draw spells met a counter while I kept drawing more lands. I hope to resolve the Kenku Artificer and make an indestructible blocker for the next turn. They attacked, put me down to 8, and with 2 cards in hand, I played the Kenku. They used a counter on it and had an Echoing Truth ready to bounce my creature and win the game. In our third game, I kept a decent hand on the play, but as it happened last time, we will have to be very careful about the opponent's bounce spells. As always, the Delver player starts with a turn 1 Delver of Secrets, to which I will play my Glint Hawk and Gingerbrute to attack and pass the turn back. The Delver flipped, revealing a Snap, so playing an All That Glitters next turn is out of the question. The opponent uses Snap to return my creature to hand, and I will play my Hawk until the next turn. A second Delver joined the party, and I used my Thoughtcast to draw a few cards. I led with the Tithing Blade to bait the counter, and as expected, it did not resolve, so I played a Glint Hawk right after. The second Delver flipped, but the opponent refused to attack, so I will just attack once more with the Brute and stay back. At the turn's end, I sacrifice an Ornithopter to use my Deadly Dispute, but the latter met a counter. Still, I untapped and once more attacked. The opponent finally decided to attack, and I traded a Blacksmith skill for a Delver and took 3 damage. However, a Tolarian Terror joined the board, and my Gingerbrute met a counter. The good news is that my opponent is left with only 1 card in hand. The bad ones are that they found a Ponder that lets them see 3 new cards from the top, and of course, they attacked, putting me down to 9. A second Glitters is good news, but I must play things carefully. Because of this, when they attacked, I decided to use the Blacksmith skill on the Brute before blocking to avoid being 2 for 1. Since my opponent returned it to hand, I opted not to block and took 5 damage this time. A Tithing Blade baited the Annul, and an All That Glitters can now apply pressure. They used a Lorien Reveal to refill their hand and play a land before attacking. I chump blocked, and now the plan is to play the Gingerbrute, give it haste, and attach the second Glitters to it, hoping they had nothing else in hand. As it turns out, they scooped. The winner is definitely not Soul Sisters, but at least it was a fun deck to play with. However, the deck I liked the most was the Rakdos Scam version, followed by Esper Glitters and Rakdos Midrange.